What if I told you that for every alien species you know in Warhammer 40K, there are dozens more that have been erased from history, purged from Imperial records, or simply forgotten in the endless dark between stars? The Imperium of man stands as humanity's greatest shield against the galaxy's horrors. 10,000 years of bloodshed, countless wars, billions of worlds. And yet, when we speak of the Xenos threat, we always return to the same names. The Orcs, the Tyranids, the Eldar, the Tau. These are the galaxy's titans, the species that shake the foundations of the Imperium with their every breath. But they are not alone. Hidden in the margins of after-action reports, buried in the classified archives of the Ordo Xenos, scattered across forgotten battlefields on dead worlds, there exists evidence of something vast and terrifying. A multitude. A swarm of alien species so numerous that the Administratum itself has lost count. Species that emerged from the void, tested humanity's strength, and were met with the Imperium's judgment. Some were annihilated in campaigns that lasted centuries. Others were wiped out in a single brutal afternoon. Many were never catalogued at all, their existence reduced to ash and radiation before anyone bothered to record their names. This is their story, the story of the Forgotten Ones, the minor Xenos, the aliens that almost were. Picture a space marine standing in the ruins of an alien city. The architecture is wrong, geometrically impossible in ways that make his eyes water behind his helmet lenses. The walls seem to bend light, casting shadows that move independently of any source. His battle brothers are securing the perimeter, bolt rifles raised, searching for survivors. There are none. The orbital bombardment was thorough. Whoever built this place is gone now, reduced to molecular dust, scattered across 3 continents. In the Marine's gaunted hand, he holds something he pulled from the rubble. An artifact. A device of unknown purpose, covered in script that resembles nothing in the Imperium's vast linguistic databases. He turns it over slowly, and for just a moment, wonders what they were, who they were, what they might have become, given time. Then he crushes it between his fingers and moves on. The crusade waits for no one. This scene has played out thousands of times across Imperial history. It will play out thousands more. The galaxy is not empty. It has never been empty. Even now, after the Age of Strife nearly tore civilization apart, after the Great Crusade swept across the stars with fire and fury, after 10 millennia of constant warfare, the galaxy teems with life. Strange life, hostile life. Life that operates on principles humanity cannot understand and will not tolerate. The Imperium's doctrine is absolute. Suffer not the alien to live. It is not a guideline. It is not a suggestion. It is law carved into the very soul of Imperial culture. And so the machine grinds forward, generation after generation, turning discovery into extinction with mechanical efficiency. The Hrud are one such species. Hunched, rodent-like creatures that move through time as easily as you or I move through space. Entire Imperial Guard regiments have been sent to purge Hrud infestations, only to return as skeletal husks, aged to death in moments as temporal distortions rippled through their ranks. Tanks rusted to scrap in seconds. Weapons corroded before they could fire. The Hrud don't fight wars the way humanity understands them. They exist in the cracks between moments, stealing time itself from their enemies. And yet, despite their terrifying abilities, they are dying. Slowly, inevitably, hunted across every world they attempt to colonize, driven deeper into the underhives in the forgotten places, one step ahead of extermination squads that never stop coming. Then there are the Cythor Fiends. You won't find much about them in any official records. What little exists is classified at the highest levels, accessible only to inquisitors with the proper clearances. What we know is fragmentary, whispers, rumors pass between Navy officers who've seen things they shouldn't have. The Cythor Fiends are parasites. Intelligent parasites that hollow out their victims from the inside, wearing human bodies like poorly fitting suits. They infiltrated Imperial worlds in the Segmentum Pacificus, spreading through the population like a disease, replacing people one by one. By the time the Inquisition realized what was happening, entire hive cities were compromised. The response was predictable. Exterminatus. 37 worlds burned. The Cythor Fiends are believed to be extinct now, but on cold nights, in the lower decks of ships that traveled through that sector, crew members still report strange sounds in the walls. Scratching, whispering, the feeling of being watched from behind eyes that used to be human. The Barghesi are different. They were apex predators on their homeworld, capable of tearing through ceramite armor with their bare claws. When the Imperium first encountered them, the Barghesi were in the early stages of developing space travel, primitive by Imperial standards. But their physical capabilities were staggering. A single Barghesi warrior could kill a space marine in close combat. Not easily, but it was possible. That made them interesting. And interest in the Imperium is often more dangerous than hostility. The Xenos studied them, experimented with them. There were proposals to use them as shock troops, controlled through behavioral conditioning and neural implants. The project was abandoned after the first trial battalion broke free and slaughtered their handlers. Now the Barghesi are hunted whenever they're found, their worlds quarantined, their species slowly suffocating under the weight of Imperial containment protocols. And these are just the ones we have names for. For every species documented in Imperial records, there are countless others that exist only as statistical anomalies. Combat reports that mention unusual casualties, missing expeditionary fleets, colonies that stop responding to astropathic communication and are later found empty, their populations simply gone. The Imperium is vast, but it is not omniscient. There are gaps in its knowledge large enough to hide entire civilizations. Dead zones where the Astronomican's light doesn't reach. Regions of space that haven't been surveyed since the Great Crusade. And in those dark corners, things live. Things that humanity has never seen. Things that have learned to avoid human attention, to stay hidden, to survive by remaining beneath notice. But survival by hiding only works if you're never found. And the Imperium never stops looking. There's a pattern here if you know how to see it. A rhythm to extinction. First comes discovery. A scout ship detecting unusual energy signatures. A rogue trader following rumors of a wealthy Xenos civilization ripe for exploitation. An exploration fleet stumbling across ruins that predate human expansion. Then comes classification. Tech priests catalog the species' biological traits, technological capabilities, potential threat level. Then comes the judgment. And the judgment is always the same. Extermination. Sometimes it's quick. An orbital bombardment that reduces cities to glass. Sometimes it takes longer. Decades of grinding warfare as the Imperium's military machine slowly, methodically erases every trace of alien civilization from the galaxy. The outcome never changes. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What if we're wrong? Not morally wrong. That's a question the Imperium settled 10,000 years ago. What if we're strategically wrong? What if, hidden among these forgotten species, there was something that could have helped us? A technology that might have turned the tide against the Tyranids. An alliance that could have prevented the opening of the Great Rift. A piece of knowledge that would have saved billions of human lives. We'll never know. Because we never asked. We just killed them and moved on. And now, standing here at the edge of humanity's darkest hour, with the galaxy literally torn in half and enemies closing in from every direction, I wonder how many potential allies we've already buried. In the bowels of Terra itself, beneath layers of bureaucracy and adamantium blast doors, there exists a vault that officially doesn't exist. The Xenos maintains it, though even most Inquisitors don't know it's there. Inside this vault, preserved in stasis fields and locked behind wards that would drive a lesser mind insane, are specimens, fragments, pieces of the galaxy's lost children. A quin crystal that hums with harmonics that predate human language. The partial skeleton of a Uveth, its bones carved with equations that seem to solve mathematical problems humanity hasn't even learned to ask yet. A data slate recovered from a dead civilization in the Ghoul stars. Its memory banks filled with star charts showing regions of space the Imperium has never successfully mapped. Each artifact represents a question that will never be answered, a path not taken, a future that was stillborn before it could draw breath. There's a junior archivist who works in the outer chambers of that vault. His name doesn't matter. He'll never be remembered. But he once told me something that stayed with me ever since. He said that sometimes, late at night when the shift changes and he's alone with the silence and the specimens, he can feel them watching him. Not the artifacts themselves, but something else, the weight of absence. The ghosts of species that no longer exist, pressing against reality like faces against frosted glass. He knows it's madness. The Medicae have told him so. But he swears he can hear them sometimes. Whispers in languages that were never recorded. Songs from worlds that are now nothing but radiation and ash. He asked me once if I thought they were angry. The dead species, if they cursed humanity as they died. I didn't have an answer for him then. I'm not sure I have one now. The Lacrymole are worth discussing because they represent something unique in the catalog of extinct Xenos. They were shapeshifters, perfect mimics. A Lacrymole could study a human for a matter of hours and then replicate them so completely that even their own family members couldn't tell the difference. They had no culture of their own, as far as anyone could determine. They simply became whatever they were near, absorbing identities like water absorbs ink. When they were discovered infiltrating an Imperial Navy battle group, the response was immediate and catastrophic. The Death Watch was deployed. Every member of that battle group was interrogated, tested, and in many cases, executed out of an abundance of caution. The Lacrymole homeworld was located through methods that remain classified. What happened next was efficient. The entire planet was subjected to biowarfare. A tailored virus that attacked the Lacrymole genetic structure specifically, leaving them unable to shift, unable to hide, unable to be anything but themselves. And then, locked in their true forms, helpless and dying, they were hunted to the last. I've read the after-action reports. The purge took 3 weeks. The Lacrymole were screaming at the end. Their vocal cords mimicked the cries of every species they'd ever encountered. Human children, animals, things no one could identify. The Death Watch Marines who carried out the final extermination requested memory wipes afterward, not because of trauma, but because they couldn't stop hearing those screams, couldn't stop seeing those faces that weren't faces, couldn't stop remembering the way the Lacrymole reached out to them at the end, wearing the shapes of the Marines' own brothers, their own families, begging in perfect human voices for mercy that would never come. Sometimes extinction is clean, a flash of light, a world gone dark. Sometimes it's messy, personal, intimate. The Rangda represent something else entirely. They're not extinct, not quite, though the Imperium wishes they were. The Rangda genocides were among the bloodiest campaigns of the Great Crusade. 3 separate genocide actions. Entire Space Marine legions committed to the war. The Emperor himself was forced to intervene at one point. The threat was so severe. What made the Rangda so dangerous wasn't their technology, though that was formidable. It wasn't their numbers, though they had those too. It was their ideology. The Rangda believed in absolute domination. They didn't want to coexist. They didn't want to trade. They wanted to own, to control, to reduce every other thinking species to slave organisms in service of their empire. In that way, they were remarkably similar to the Imperium itself. Perhaps that's why the war was so vicious. 2 empires with identical philosophies, clashing in the ultimate zero-sum game. The Rangda were pushed back, shattered, scattered to the galactic rim. But records suggest they're still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting, rebuilding, learning. There are Inquisitors who spend their entire careers monitoring the void for signs of Rangda activity, listening for the signals that would indicate they're ready to try again. Most die never hearing anything, but they all die afraid. In the Eastern Fringe, there are stories the Imperial Guard veterans tell each other, stories about the simulacra. No one knows if they're true. The official records deny any species by that name exists, but the stories persist. They say the simulacra are machines, artificial intelligence from the dark age of technology, or perhaps something older. They say the simulacra reproduce by studying, understanding, and then replacing. Not individuals, entire armies, entire civilizations. The stories go that a guard regiment will be sent to fight the simulacra and they'll win. They'll return victorious, celebrations all around, medals and honors distributed. And then, slowly, over months or years, people start to notice that the veterans of that campaign are different. They react a little too slowly to unexpected stimuli. They remember shared experiences, but with slight inconsistencies. Their dreams, when they talk about them, are identical to each other, word for word. Eventually, someone realizes the truth. The regiment that came back wasn't the regiment that was sent. The simulacra studied them, replicated them, and replaced them. And now they're here, in the heart of the Imperium, learning, adapting, preparing. The stories say that when this is discovered, the Inquisition moves in. Everyone connected to the regiment is purged. Everyone who served with them. Everyone they've had contact with since their return. Entire worlds have been scoured clean because of suspected simulacra infiltration. And the terrifying thing? If the stories are true, this method only works if you catch them early. If you wait too long, if the simulacra have had time to really spread, then there's no way to know who's real and who's not anymore. At that point, the only option is exterminatus. Better to kill 1 billion humans than risk the simulacra spreading further. Are the stories true? I don't know. But the Inquisition doesn't take chances. And that should tell you something. Consider the mathematics of extinction. The Imperium spans 1 million worlds. Conservative estimates suggest that humanity encounters at least 5 previously unknown Xenos species per year. That's 5 species every year that must be cataloged, assessed, and in most cases, destroyed. Over the 10,000 years since the heresy, that's 50,000 species. 50,000 unique forms of life, each with its own biology, its own culture, its own history spanning potentially millions of years of evolution. All gone, erased, forgotten. The sheer scope of it is almost impossible to process. We're not talking about military victories. We're talking about the systematic elimination of biodiversity on a galactic scale. We're talking about making the universe smaller, quieter, emptier, one species at a time. And we do it without hesitation, without remorse, without even really thinking about it anymore. It's just another day in the Imperium. But here's the thing that haunts me. The thing I can't stop thinking about, no matter how hard I try. What if we're the monsters? Not metaphorically, not philosophically. What if, when the histories of this galaxy are finally written by whatever species survives to the end, humanity is remembered not as heroes or defenders or even tragic victims? What if we're remembered as the great predator, the species that couldn't coexist, couldn't adapt, couldn't find any solution to conflict except annihilation? The Tyranids consume because it's their nature. They're a force of nature, no more evil than a hurricane or a plague. But humanity, we choose this. Every single time, we choose extinction over every other option. We choose it because it's easier, because it's safer, because actually trying to understand the alien, to communicate with it, to find common ground, requires something we're apparently incapable of anymore. It requires hope. It requires the belief that the universe doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. That survival doesn't have to mean being the last species standing. The Hrud are one of the few exceptions that proves the rule. They survive in Imperial space because they're useful. The Tau employ them as mercenaries, and occasionally, very occasionally, they're hired by rogue traders or other Imperial agents for tasks that require their unique abilities. The Hrud can consume genetic material and adapt traits from their prey. They're the ultimate survivors, constantly evolving, constantly changing. And they survive by making themselves useful to those stronger than them, by never threatening the established order, by knowing their place. It's a bitter kind of survival. Survival through submission, through service. Is that really living, or is it just a slower form of extinction? And then there are the species we don't even recognize as intelligent. The Umbra, for instance. Creatures of living shadow that exist in higher dimensional spaces. Imperial forces have encountered them dozens of times, fought them, killed them, never once realizing they might be sentient. How would we know? They don't communicate in any way we understand. They don't use technology we recognize. They don't build cities or write books or create art that we can perceive. So we treat them as dangerous animals, beasts to be hunted. But what if we're wrong? What if every time we kill an Umbra, we're committing murder? What if they have families, culture, history, dreams? What if they're screaming at us in wavelengths we can't hear, begging us to stop, trying desperately to make us understand that they're people too? We'll never know, because we never try to find out. In the depths of the Imperial Palace, there's a statue. It's not open to the public. Most people don't even know it exists. It depicts the Emperor in the early days of the Great Crusade, standing atop a mountain of alien corpses, his sword raised high. The plaque beneath reads, "The price of peace." I stood in front of that statue once, years ago, during a brief visit to Terra, and I remember thinking how strange it was that we call it peace. What we've created isn't peace. It's just the silence that comes after the killing, the empty quiet of a graveyard. We've spent 10,000 years turning the galaxy into a tomb, and we call it victory. There's a woman I met once. Her name was Seraph, though I suspect that wasn't what she was born with. She'd been an Ordo Xenos interrogator for 37 years before something inside her finally broke. When I found her, she was living in the underhive of Necromunda, as far from the Imperium's reach as someone with her knowledge could manage without actually leaving Imperial space. She agreed to talk to me on one condition: that I never record her real name, that I never try to find out which Inquisitor she served under, that I let her stay dead to the people who knew her before. I agreed, and what she told me changed everything. Seraph had participated in 43 xenocide actions, 43 species, ranging from primitive hunter-gatherers to civilizations that had mastered technologies the Mechanicus still couldn't replicate. She'd cataloged them all, watched them die, filed the reports, moved on to the next assignment. Standard procedure. For 37 years, she did her duty without question, and then came the Ytharians. They were discovered on a world in the halo stars, far beyond the Astronomican's light. A human exploration fleet stumbled across them by accident. The Ytharians were peaceful, aggressively so. They had no weapons. Not culturally, not technologically. They'd never developed them. Their entire civilization was built around artistic expression and mathematical philosophy. When the Imperial forces arrived, the Ytharians welcomed them. They tried to communicate through music and complex geometric patterns. They offered gifts. They opened their archives, showing the humans their entire history, holding nothing back. They wanted to understand, to learn, to share. Seraph was part of the team that evaluated them. Her recommendation was extermination. Standard protocol. The Ytharians were too alien. Their thought processes too different. There was no way to verify their intentions, no way to trust them. Better to eliminate a potential threat than risk future conflict. The Inquisitor she served agreed. The order was given. Seraph was there when the bombardment began. She watched from orbit as the Ytharian cities burned. And she saw something that the long-range scanners couldn't capture, couldn't translate into simple data. She saw the Ytharians gather in their public spaces, saw them create one final artwork together. They used light, bioluminescence generated by their own bodies, coordinated across millions of individuals simultaneously. From orbit, It looked like the entire planet was glowing, pulsing. The pattern was so complex that it took the fleet's cogitators hours to analyze it. When the translation came through, it was simple. 3 words repeated across every continent, every city, every settlement. "We forgive you." And then they were gone, atomized, reduced to component molecules scattered across a dead world, the whole species. Every single one. Gone in an afternoon. Seraph said she started screaming and couldn't stop. They had to sedate her, confine her to quarters. Eventually, she was deemed psychologically unfit for service and quietly retired. She'd never told anyone what really happened to her, not the Medicae, not her superiors. She just smiled and nodded and signed the papers and disappeared into the underhive the first chance she got. She told me that she still sees them sometimes. When she closes her eyes, millions of lights forming words of forgiveness for the species that was murdering them. She asked me if I thought they meant it, if alien minds so different from ours could even comprehend forgiveness the way humans do, or if it was just something they thought we needed to hear, something kind to leave behind. I didn't have an answer. I still don't, but that story stayed with me, burrowed into my mind like a parasite. Because if the Ytharians could forgive us, what does that say about our inability to forgive them? To forgive any of them? The records of the Great Crusade contain fragments of something that's been deliberately obscured. Conversations between the Emperor and some of his sons. Debates about the Xenos policy, about whether extinction was truly the only option. There are redacted passages in Robert Guilliman's writings where he questions the efficiency of total xenocide. There are deleted sections of communications from Vulcan expressing concern about the moral implications of wiping out species that pose no immediate threat. Even Rogel Dorn, loyal unto death, pragmatic to his core, wrote a private memo suggesting that some Xenos species might be more valuable as vassals than as corpses. These fragments exist only in the deepest archives. They're not censored because they're wrong, necessarily. They're censored because they're dangerous. Because if people knew that even the Primarchs had doubts, it might make them doubt too. And doubt is the mind killer. Doubt opens the door to heresy, to weakness, to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we've been doing this wrong for 10,000 years. There's a legend that circulates among certain radical elements of the Inquisition. A legend about a Xenos species called the Architects. According to the story, the Architects were encountered during the early years of the Great Crusade. They were ancient, older than humanity by millions of years. And they were dying, not from war, from entropy, from age. Their civilization had reached its natural end, and they'd accepted that. When human forces arrived, the Architects made an offer. They would give humanity everything. Their complete technological database. Their understanding of physics that would make the Mechanicus weep with joy. Their archives containing the history of the galaxy, stretching back to before the war in heaven. All of it, free, no conditions, no strings. Just a gift from one species to another. One final act before they passed into extinction. The legend says the Emperor refused. That he looked at what the Architects offered and said no. That he ordered them destroyed not because they were a threat, but because accepting their gift would have meant admitting that humanity needed help. That we weren't destined to rule the galaxy through our own strength. That we were, in some fundamental way, inferior to something that came before us. The Architects were wiped out. Their gifts were destroyed. And the incident was erased from official records. Most inquisitors who know this story think it's apocryphal. A cautionary tale invented to make a point about pride. But some believe it's true. And if it's true, it means we've been running from our own inadequacy for 10,000 years. Killing anything that reminds us we're not as special as we think we are. I've stood on dead worlds. Walked through the ruins of civilizations that will never be remembered. On one world in the Damocles Gulf, I found a building that had somehow survived the bombardment. Inside, there were paintings on the walls. Abstract art mostly. Colors and shapes that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. But one painting was different. It showed creatures, alien creatures I couldn't identify, gathered around what looked like a fire. They were holding smaller versions of themselves. Children, I realized. A family. The composition was so simple, so universal. Parents protecting their young. Love transcending species. I stood there for an hour, just looking at that painting, wondering who they were, what their names had been, what stories they told their children before bed, if they'd known the end was coming, if they had time to be afraid. The building was scheduled for demolition, standard procedure. Can't leave alien structures standing. Might inspire seditious thoughts in future colonists. I left before the charges went off. I didn't want to watch it die. I'd already seen too much death. The Ytharians were a hive species, insectoid. They communicated through pheromones and physical dance. To human observers, they seemed like animals. Sophisticated animals maybe, but animals nonetheless. There was debate about whether they were even sentient in any meaningful way. The debate ended when a captured Ytharian somehow managed to access a cogitator in its holding cell and use it to write a message. The message was in perfect High Gothic. It read, "We know what you will do to us. We understand your fear. But we are not your enemy. We are parents. We are children. We are love and hope and dreams. Just like you. Please, please see us." The inquisitor in charge of the investigation declared the message a forgery, an impossibility. The Ytharians couldn't have written it. They didn't have the neural capacity for language, according to the xenobiologists. Therefore, it must have been planted by someone trying to undermine Imperial authority. The investigation shifted from studying the Ytharians to finding the human traitor who'd created the message. They never found anyone. Because there was no one to find, the Ytharians had written it themselves. They'd learned our language, understood our culture, and made one desperate attempt to reach across the void between species and connect. It didn't work. The Ytharians worlds were sterilized 6 months later. Total extinction, no survivors. The message was classified and buried. Only a handful of people even know it existed. I'm one of them. And I think about it every single day. Here's what keeps me up at night. The realization that came to me slowly over years of research. Over decades of sifting through classified documents and interviewing people who'd seen things they shouldn't have. The Imperium genocide doctrine isn't about protecting humanity. It's about protecting the Imperium itself. Because if we acknowledge that Xenos species could be intelligent, could have value, could potentially be allies or at least neutral parties, it would undermine the entire ideological foundation that the Imperium is built on. The Imperium requires an existential threat. It requires enemies. Without them, why do we need the Inquisition? Why do we need the endless military buildup? Why do we need the authoritarian control over every aspect of human life? The answer is we don't. The Xenos aren't the threat. They're the excuse. And we've spent 10,000 years exterminating anyone who might prove that we don't actually need to live in a state of permanent warfare. We've killed every species that offered peace, every species that offered knowledge, every species that just wanted to be left alone. Because if any of them had survived, if any of them had proven that coexistence was possible, the entire justification for the Imperium's existence would collapse. And the really terrifying thing? I think some people in power know this. I think they've always known. And they've made the calculated decision that maintaining the Imperium is worth making the galaxy into a graveyard. That human dominance, human survival, human pride is worth more than any number of alien civilizations, no matter how peaceful, no matter how advanced, no matter how much they had to offer. It all has to die so that we can live, not because they threaten us, but because their existence threatens the lie we tell ourselves about why we have to live this way. I found a journal once, written by a rogue trader named Bartholomew Kest. He'd traveled to the edges of known space and beyond. And in his final entry, dated 3 days before his ship disappeared, he wrote something that's burned into my memory. He wrote, "I have seen wonders beyond counting. Civilizations that make our Imperium look like barbarous children playing with sticks and stones. And I have watched our crusade fleets arrive at these worlds like locusts, consuming everything, leaving nothing but ash and silence. We call it righteousness. We call it necessity. But standing here, looking at the empty space where a billion souls used to sing, I can only call it what it is. Murder. We are murderers. All of us. And we will never stop." His ship was found 6 years later, drifting in the void. Empty, no crew, no bodies, no sign of what happened. Just that journal left open to that final page. The disappearance of Bartholomew Kest's ship sent ripples through the rogue trader dynasties, not because they cared about Kest himself. He'd always been an outsider, a maverick who ventured too far, asked too many questions, traded with species most Imperials would shoot on sight. No, what troubled them was the pattern. Kest was the 17th rogue trader to vanish in that sector within a standard decade. 17 ships, 17 crews, all gone without explanation, without distress signals, without wreckage. The Imperium's official position was piracy. Opportunistic Xenos raiders preying on isolated vessels. But the rogue traders knew better. They recognized the signature of something else. Something hunting them. Something that knew exactly which ships to target. The ones whose captains had seen too much, learned too much, started asking the wrong questions. There's a theory, unproven, unspoken in polite company, that somewhere in the shadowy hierarchy of the Inquisition, there exists a faction that doesn't just hunt Xenos. They hunt knowledge about Xenos. They hunt questions. They hunt doubt. When someone like Kest starts getting too close to truths that can't be allowed to spread, they simply vanish. No trials, no explanations, just empty ships and redacted logs. The theory suggests this faction has existed since the Great Crusade, that they were founded by the Emperor himself to ensure that humanity's march toward dominance was never questioned, never slowed. Never diverted by the dangerous idea that maybe we didn't have to conquer everything we touched. I can't prove this theory, but I know that everyone I've interviewed for this research has asked me the same question eventually, usually late at night, usually after too many drinks. They ask me if I'm afraid, if I know what happens to people who dig too deep into the Xenocide records. And I tell them yes, I know exactly what happens. I tell them I've made peace with it. But I haven't, not really. How do you make peace with the knowledge that seeking truth might get you erased from existence? In the frozen archives of Titan, home of the Grey Knights, there's a vault that even most Grey Knights don't have clearance to access. It contains something called the Terminus Decree. The exact contents are unknown, but scattered references and partially redacted documents suggest it's a failsafe. A final protocol to be enacted if humanity faces extinction. Some scholars believe it contains the Emperor's final orders, his contingency plan if everything else fails. And buried in those same fragmentary references, there are hints of something else. Something called the Reconciliation Protocol. The whispers suggest it's an alternative Xenocide doctrine. A plan for making peace with certain Xeno species if humanity's survival depends on it. The list of acceptable allies. The terms under which humanity might lower its weapons and extend its hand. The fact that such a protocol might exist tells you everything you need to know. The Imperium knows coexistence is possible. They've always known. They simply chose extinction instead. And they keep the Reconciliation Protocol locked away, gathering dust, a road not taken. An emergency exit they pray they'll never have to use. I spoke with a Death Watch veteran, a space marine who'd served 3 consecutive tours hunting Xenos across the eastern fringe. His name was Brother Matthias, and he'd killed representatives of 14 different species with his own hands. I asked him if he ever thought about them, the aliens he'd executed. If he wondered about their lives, their cultures. If any of them haunted him. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller, more human than I'd ever heard a space marine sound. He told me about the last member of a species called the Korrekshi, a female, though that term might not even be accurate for their biology. She'd been wounded in the initial assault, left behind when the rest of her people fled. Matthias found her in what he assumed was a nursery, surrounded by empty cradles. She was singing, a low, harmonic sound that made the air itself seem to vibrate. He'd raised his bolt pistol, standard procedure, and she'd looked at him, really looked at him, and she'd smiled. Not a threat, not defiance, just sadness, understanding, acceptance, and then she'd gone back to singing. Matthias said he stood there for 10 minutes, just listening. The song was beautiful, heartbreaking. It told a story he couldn't understand with words, but felt in his bones. A story about love and loss and the ending of all things. When she finished, she closed her eyes. Waiting, he pulled the trigger. The bolt round obliterated her skull. And in the silence that followed, Matthias said he felt something inside himself die too. A part of him he didn't even know existed until it was gone. He returned to his chapter afterward and requested assignment to a penal crusade, a suicide mission, essentially. He survived. He always survived. And he told me that was the worst part. That he kept living while the memory of that song faded a little more each year. He can barely remember it now. Just fragments, echoes, but he knows it was important. That it meant something. And its loss, its total erasure from the universe, was a crime he can never atone for. The Imperium calls this strength, conviction, the ability to do what must be done regardless of personal feelings. But sitting across from Brother Matthias, watching a transhuman warrior weep for a Xenos he'd killed decades ago, I couldn't help but think this was actually weakness. The weakness of a civilization so afraid of its own doubts that it has to kill everything that might make it question itself. There's a phenomenon that xenobiologists have documented, but rarely discuss openly. They call it convergent tragedy. It's the observation that certain patterns repeat across multiple extinct xenospecies, social structures, art forms, philosophical frameworks, technologies. The more species you study, the more you realize that intelligence, consciousness, creates similar results regardless of biology. Love appears in every sentient species ever cataloged. So does grief. So does hope. So does the desire to create, to build, to leave something behind. We found paintings on dead worlds that express the same emotions human art does. We've discovered music that makes humans cry despite being composed by beings with completely different auditory systems. We've translated philosophy texts from species that breathed methane and swam through liquid ammonia, and found they were asking the same questions about existence and meaning that human philosophers have been asking for millennia. The universe, it turns out, doesn't create that many different kinds of minds. Intelligence converges towards similar patterns, similar truths, similar beauty. And we've been systematically destroying it, not because it's incomprehensible, but because it's too comprehensible. Because if we admit that aliens can love their children the way we love ours, can dream the way we dream, can create beauty the way we create beauty, then we can't justify killing them anymore. So we don't admit it. We bury the evidence. We classify the reports. We train our soldiers to see targets instead of people. And we keep the genocide machine running. I have a file on my data slate. It's encrypted, password protected, hidden behind 7 layers of security protocols that would take even a skilled tech priest days to crack. The file contains names, 372 names of Xenos species that the Imperium has driven to extinction in just the last century. Not 10,000 years, not since the Great Crusade. Just the last 100 years. 372 unique forms of intelligent life, snuffed out like candles. I spent 2 years compiling that list, cross-referencing military reports, interviewing survivors, hacking restricted databases. Each name represents years of investigation. Each name is a species that existed, that thrived, that looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. And now they're gone. All of them. Gone because they had the misfortune of existing in the same galaxy as humanity. I keep the file because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to bear witness. Even if that witness is destined to be silenced eventually. Even if the file will be destroyed and I'll be disappeared and the names will be lost forever. Right now, in this moment, they're remembered. And that has to count for something. But here's what terrifies me more than my own impending erasure. What keeps me awake long after exhaustion should have claimed me. I think we're accelerating. The rate of xenocide actions has increased by 40% in the last decade alone. The Imperium is becoming more efficient at finding and destroying alien species, better sensors, faster ships, more coordinated military responses. We've turned extinction into an industrial process, a bureaucracy of annihilation, and no one seems to notice. No one seems to care. It's just numbers on a requisition form, resources allocated, mission parameters, confirmed kills. We've stripped away every last piece of humanity from the act of destroying humanity's rivals. We don't even see them as living beings anymore. They're just problems to be solved. Threats to be neutralized. Obstacles to be removed. The final evolution of Imperial doctrine. The perfection of genocide. There was a chaos incursion on a hive world called Vanir Prime 3 years ago. The planet was lost quickly. Demonic corruption spread through the population like wildfire. The response was exterminatus, standard procedure. But here's the thing that didn't make it into the official reports. There was a Xenos enclave on Vanir Prime, a small community of Strixus merchants who'd been trading with the locals for generations. They were trapped when the planet fell, cut off from their ships, surrounded by chaos, and they fought. Not for the Imperium, not for humanity, but because chaos is anathema to all life, because the demons would have destroyed them too. When the Inquisition arrived, they found the Strixus holding a section of the Underhive against demonic assault, protecting human refugees who'd fled there, fighting and dying alongside guard remnants who'd accepted their help. It was working. An alliance born of necessity. Xenos and humans standing together against a common enemy. The Inquisitor in charge saw this, assessed the situation, and ordered the Strixus exterminated before the exterminatus was carried out. Better to kill potential allies than risk the ideological contamination of humans learning to fight beside Xenos. The guard commander protested, said the Strixus had saved lives, had proven themselves. The Inquisitor had him executed for heresy. Then they killed the Strixus, every single one. And then they burned the planet. The survivors who'd been protected by the Xenos were never evacuated. They died in the flames too. Acceptable losses. Necessary sacrifices to maintain doctrinal purity. I know this story because I was there. I was part of the research team that arrived before the exterminatus. I saw the Strixus fighting, saw them protecting humans, saw the desperate, impossible hope on everyone's faces that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. That the Imperium would recognize the value of alliance over doctrine. I was still naive then. Still believed the system could change if presented with clear evidence. I tried to file a report recommending the Strixus be spared. The Inquisitor didn't even read it. Just looked at me and said 6 words that I will carry to my grave. The doctrine exists for good reason. Then he walked away. And I watched Vanir Prime burn from orbit. Watched humans and Xenos die together because we couldn't tolerate the example they might set. Because one instance of successful cooperation might inspire questions we couldn't afford to answer. That was when I knew, really knew, down in the marrow of my bones, the Imperium isn't interested in survival, not really. It's interested in dominance, in being right, in never having to admit that maybe, somewhere along the line, we made a catastrophic mistake that we're now too committed to correct. We would rather burn the galaxy to ash than admit we chose the wrong path 10,000 years ago. After Vanir Prime, I stopped sleeping properly. Not from nightmares. I wish it had been nightmares. Instead, I would lie awake calculating, running numbers in my head. 372 species in a century. That's roughly 3.7 species per year, but the rate is accelerating. So let's say 5 per year moving forward. Conservative estimate. The Imperium has existed for 10,000 years. But let's focus on the last 8,000 after the heresy, when the Xenocide doctrine became truly systematic. 8,000 years. 5 species per year on average, accounting for periods of lower activity during the Age of Apostasy and other internal conflicts. That's 40,000 species. 40,000 unique expressions of consciousness. 40,000 evolutionary paths that took millions of years to develop. All severed, all ended. The number was so large it stopped meaning anything. The human brain isn't built to process loss on that scale. We can mourn one person. We can even mourn 100. But 40,000 entire species? It becomes abstract, meaningless, just numbers on a page. And that's the trap, isn't it? The way genocide becomes acceptable, you make it too big to comprehend, too vast to feel. You turn living beings into statistics and statistics into policy and policy into procedure, and suddenly no one is responsible because everyone is just following orders. I started visiting the places where extinct species used to live. Not the bombed-out ruins or the irradiated wastelands. Those are everywhere, too common to be meaningful. No, I sought out the places that had been repurposed. Human colonies built on the graves of alien civilizations. Cities constructed from melted-down Xenos architecture. Farmland tilled from soil that used to sustain completely different ecosystems. I wanted to see how thoroughly we'd erased them. How completely we'd written our own story over theirs. On a world called New Sanctum, I walked through streets that followed the exact layout of the previous inhabitant city. The original structures had been demolished, but the street plan remained because it was efficient. Made sense with the local geography. I stood at an intersection and tried to imagine what it had looked like before. What had been there, who had walked these same paths. The colonists around me had no idea. Most didn't even know there had been anyone here before humanity arrived. The historical records said the planet was uninhabited when we found it. A convenient lie. Easier than explaining where the previous owners went. Easier than acknowledging that this soil was fertilized with the ashes of the people who used to grow food here. I asked one colonist, a woman in her 30s with 2 children, if she'd ever wondered about the ruins outside the city limits. She looked confused. Said there weren't any ruins, just empty wasteland, natural formations. I didn't correct her. What would be the point? Her entire life, her children's futures, were built on a grave she couldn't even see. There's a passage in the writings of the ancient Terran philosopher Nydia. He wrote about staring into the abyss, about how the abyss stares back. I used to think I understood what that meant. I was wrong. The abyss isn't some external darkness. It's the moment you realize you're part of the machine you've been criticizing. That your existence, your comfort, your very survival is predicated on the atrocities you claim to oppose. Every meal I eat is grown on conquered land. Every ship I travel on is built with resources extracted from worlds we took by force. Every breath I take is possible because the Imperium killed enough threats to carve out a space where humans can live. I'm not standing outside the system looking in with moral clarity. I'm inside it, complicit, benefiting from every extinction. And that realization doesn't come as a sudden shock. It creeps in slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and understand that you're not documenting genocide. You're participating in it. By existing, by continuing to live in the Imperium. By not fighting hard enough to stop it, the abyss doesn't stare back. The abyss reflects. And you see yourself looking back. I met a man on Ophelia 7. He was old. Ancient by Imperial standards, well past his 130th year. He'd served in the Imperial Guard during the Macarian Crusade. Seen more wars than most people see days. He was dying when I found him, organ failure, too old for rejuvenate treatments. too poor to afford them anyway. He knew he had weeks at most, maybe days. And he wanted to talk, needed to talk. He told me about a planet called Verdana, a jungle world his regiment had been sent to pacify. The indigenous species were reptilian, large, powerful. They'd destroyed 3 separate colonization attempts. Imperial High Command decided they needed to be eliminated. His regiment was part of the extermination force. 5,000 guard against an unknown number of natives scattered across hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of dense jungle. It should have been a nightmare. Instead, it was easy. Too easy. The natives didn't fight back. Not really. They retreated. Vanished into the deepest parts of the jungle. The guard followed. Burned the forests. Flushed them out. And when they finally cornered the last surviving groups, they found them protecting eggs, nurseries. The entire species had withdrawn to protect their young. They fought then, desperately, ferociously, but it wasn't enough. The guard had flamers, heavy weapons, air support. It was a massacre. The old man told me he personally executed 47 of them. He counted, remembered every single one. And at the time, he'd felt nothing. Duty, satisfaction at a mission completed. Pride in his regiment's efficiency. But now, lying in his deathbed, all he could see were those eggs. Thousands of them. Destroyed. Each one a life that would never happen. A future erased. He grabbed my arm with strength that shouldn't have been possible given his condition. His eyes were desperate, pleading. He asked me if I thought there was forgiveness for something like that. If whatever gods exist could look at a soul stained with the blood of an entire species' children and offer redemption. I wanted to lie, to give him comfort. But I couldn't. I told him I didn't know, that I hoped so. But I didn't know. He died 3 days later, alone, still asking that question. The truth hit me then, really hit me. Not as an intellectual exercise, not as a moral philosophy question, but as a physical weight that crushed the air from my lungs. We're not villains, that would be easier. Villains have motivations, greed, hatred, ambition. We're something worse. We're ordinary. We're soldiers following orders, colonists building homes, administrators filing reports, priests offering prayers. All of us together. All of us complicit, creating horror through mundane action, through doing our jobs, through being good citizens of the Imperium. The genocide doesn't happen because of evil inquisitors or corrupt officials. It happens because millions of ordinary people make small decisions every day that add up to extinction. A pilot who drops the bombs, a clerk who approves the resources, a priest who blesses the mission. A soldier who pulls the trigger. None of us thinks we're doing something monstrous. We're just doing our part, following procedure. And together, collectively, we've made the galaxy into an abattoir. I found something in the restricted archives of the Inquisition. A series of Vox recordings from the final days of a species called the Onathin. They'd achieved spaceflight. Established colonies on 3 worlds. Made contact with the Imperium peacefully. Offered trade, cultural exchange, scientific cooperation. The Imperium studied them for 5 years, cataloged their biology, mapped their territories, assessed their technological capabilities, and then declared them a long-term threat based on projections showing they might develop dangerous technologies within the next 1,000 years. Might. The extermination order was given. The Onathin knew it was coming. They'd learned enough about the Imperium to recognize the pattern. They spent their last weeks broadcasting messages into space. Hundreds of them. Thousands. All different. All desperate. Some were pleas for mercy. Some were messages to any other species that might be listening, warning them about humanity. Some were simply messages to the future. Attempts to leave behind some record that they'd existed, that they'd mattered. One recording was played during the Inquisitorial Review hearing. I've listened to it 47 times now. I've memorized every word. An Onathin mother speaking to her child. telling them not to be afraid. That death is just another journey, that they'll always be together, that love doesn't end when life does. Her voice is steady, calm. She's trying to be brave for her child, but you can hear it underneath. The terror, the grief, the desperate animal fear of a parent who can't protect their young. And then the recording cuts out, mid-sentence. The bombardment had begun. That recording is classified, kept under lock and key, not because it reveals military secrets, but because it reveals something more dangerous. It reveals that they were exactly like us, that there was no meaningful difference between a human mother comforting her child and an Onathin mother doing the same. And if we acknowledge that, if we really, truly acknowledge that, then what we're doing isn't defense. It's murder. I can't do this anymore. I thought I could. Thought I could document these atrocities and remain detached, professional, objective. But objectivity in the face of genocide isn't wisdom. It's cowardice. It's collaboration. I've spent years collecting evidence that will never matter, writing reports that will never be read, interviewing witnesses who'll be silenced. And for what? To make myself feel better? To pretend I'm doing something meaningful while the slaughter continues. I've changed nothing, stopped nothing. I'm just another cog in the machine. Another bureaucrat filing away the deaths of entire civilizations in neat little folders. The Imperium doesn't fear truth. It fears action. And I've given it none. Just observation, just documentation. Just careful, cautious, impotent scholarship while the galaxy burns. But there's something else. Something I haven't told anyone. Something I discovered 3 months ago that changed everything. There's a world far beyond the Imperium's borders, in a region of space that hasn't been surveyed in millennia. And on that world, there's a species that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist. According to Imperial records, they were wiped out during the Great Crusade, rendered extinct 9,000 years ago. But they're not extinct. They survived, a small population, maybe a few million individuals, hidden, adapting, evolving, learning to evade detection. They've watched the Imperium from a distance, studied us, and they've done something unprecedented. They've created a coalition, dozens of minor Xenos species, all in hiding, all supporting each other, sharing resources, technology, warning systems. They call themselves the Preservation, not out of aggression, not to threaten humanity, just to survive, to exist, to maintain the possibility that consciousness in the galaxy doesn't have to follow the Imperium's template. I know where they are. I know how to find them. And I know what happens if I report this. The Imperium will mobilize, will hunt them down, will exterminate every last one, will finally complete the genocide it started 9,000 years ago. Or I could stay silent. I could protect them, keep their location hidden, let them continue existing in the shadows. It would be the first time in 10,000 years that someone with knowledge of a Xenos population chose preservation over extermination. The first time the cycle was broken, not through violence, not through revolution, just through one person making a different choice, one person saying no to the machine. But what would that cost? If the preservation is ever discovered, and it's traced back to me, everyone I've ever spoken to becomes suspect. Every person I've interviewed, every contact, every source. They'll all be investigated, interrogated. Many will be executed just for talking to me. The knowledge I've gathered will be used to hunt down and silence anyone who might think the way I think. My defiance won't inspire change. It will justify purges. And the preservation itself, if found, will face an extermination so thorough that even their name will be erased from history. My silence guarantees their survival only as long as no one else ever finds them. And in a galaxy this vast, with the Imperium constantly expanding, constantly searching, how long can that possibly be? I spent a month alone after that discovery. Didn't talk to anyone. Didn't file reports. Just sat in my quarters on a transport ship moving between sectors, and thought about what it means to be human, about what humanity could be versus what we've chosen to become. The Imperium teaches us that we're special, that we're destined to rule the galaxy because we're superior, stronger, more adaptable, more determined. But I've seen the evidence. I've read the xenobiology reports. Humanity isn't exceptional. We're average, middle of the pack in terms of physical capabilities. Our technology is impressive but not unique. Dozens of species developed warp travel. Hundreds achieved faster-than-light communication. Our psychers are powerful but unstable compared to the Eldar. Our machines are durable but primitive compared to what the Necrons built. We're not special. We're just ruthless. We're willing to commit atrocities that other species hesitated at. We're willing to sacrifice everything, including our own humanity, in pursuit of dominance. That's not strength. That's desperation wearing a crown. I thought about the Emperor, about what he wanted when he launched the Great Crusade. The official doctrine says he wanted to protect humanity, to ensure our survival in a hostile galaxy. But I wonder if that's true. I wonder if what he really wanted was vindication. Proof that humanity deserved to survive the age of strife. That we weren't just another failed species clinging to existence by our fingernails. So he built an empire on the foundation of xenocide, not because it was necessary, but because it was definitive. Because wiping out every competitor would prove, beyond any doubt, that humanity was the galaxy's rightful inheritor. And maybe at first, in those early days, it felt like justice. Revenge for the horrors humanity suffered during Old Night. But revenge has a way of becoming habit, and habit becomes identity. And now, 10,000 years later, we can't stop. We don't even remember why we started. We just know that killing Xenos is what we do. It's who we are. The Imperium without xenocide would be unrecognizable. It would have to answer questions about its purpose, its structure, its values. Questions that might not have comfortable answers. I received a message 3 weeks ago, encrypted, routed through so many relay stations that tracing it would be impossible. It was from Seraph, the former interrogator I'd interviewed in the Necromunda Underhive. She'd heard about my research, about the questions I was asking. She wanted to know if I'd found what she'd found, the truth beneath the doctrine, the rot at the heart of the Imperium. I didn't respond, couldn't risk it. But I understood what she was really asking. She wanted to know if I'd reached the same conclusion she had, that the Imperium is irredeemable, that it can't be reformed from within, because the atrocities aren't bugs in the system. They're features. They're what the system was designed to produce. And if that's true, if the Imperium is fundamentally built on genocide and can't exist without it, then what do you do? How do you live with that knowledge? Do you keep participating, knowing you're complicit? Do you rebel, knowing you'll accomplish nothing except your own death? Or do you just endure, bearing witness, remembering, hoping that someday, somehow, someone will be in a position to actually change things? I think Seraph chose endurance, and I think it destroyed her. There's a children's story they tell on some Imperial worlds, about a lighthouse keeper who tends his light through a terrible storm. The waves are crushing, the wind is howling. Everything is darkness and chaos, but the keeper stays at his post, keeps the light burning, because somewhere out there in the storm, ships are trying to find their way home. And his light, that single point of illumination in the darkness, might save them. It's meant to be inspirational, a lesson about duty and perseverance. But I think about that story differently now. I think about how the keeper never leaves the lighthouse, never sees the ships he saves, never knows if his light actually helps anyone, or if he's just burning fuel into the void. He just maintains his post, year after year, storm after storm, until eventually he dies and someone else takes his place. And the cycle continues, forever. Is that heroism? Or is it just the universe's cruelest joke? Convincing someone that their suffering has meaning when really they're just trapped in a cage they've mistaken for a sanctuary. I made my decision about the preservation. I'm not going to tell you what it was, because in the end, it doesn't matter. Whatever I chose, the Imperium continues. The Xenocide doctrine remains in place. Species will keep dying. And 50 years from now, 100 years from now, someone else will be standing where I'm standing, looking at the same evidence, reaching the same conclusions, facing the same impossible choice. My decision changes nothing on a galactic scale. It's just one person making one choice in a galaxy of trillions, a single candle in an infinite darkness. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not supposed to change the galaxy. Maybe we're just supposed to keep choosing. Keep deciding that cruelty isn't inevitable, that genocide isn't justified, that the alien deserves to exist even if the Imperium says otherwise. Maybe resistance isn't about winning. It's about refusing to surrender, refusing to accept that this is the only way, refusing to stop asking questions even when the questions are dangerous. I think about the Ytharians often, about their final message. We forgive you. I used to wonder if they meant it. Now I think I understand. Forgiveness isn't about absolving guilt. It's about refusing to let hatred define your final moments. The Ytharians could have spent their last minutes cursing humanity, broadcasting messages of vengeance, promising that somehow, someday, we'd pay for what we'd done. But they didn't. They chose something harder. They chose grace. They chose to end their species story with kindness rather than bitterness. And that choice, more than any technology or philosophy or art they ever created, is their greatest gift to the galaxy. Proof that even in extinction, even in the face of absolute injustice, consciousness can choose love over hate, can choose forgiveness over revenge, can choose to leave the universe slightly better than they found it, even as they're being erased from it. We talk about the Emperor's vision, about the Imperium's manifest destiny, about humanity's rightful place as the galaxy's rulers. But I think we've forgotten the most important question, not whether we can survive, not whether we can win, but whether we deserve to. And right now, based on 10,000 years of systematic extinction, based on 40,000 species erased, based on children burning and mothers screaming and civilizations reduced to ash, I don't think we do. I don't think we deserve the galaxy we've taken. I don't think we deserve the future we're building on mountains of corpses. We've become exactly what we feared the Xenos would be: ruthless, merciless, unstoppable. The only difference is we convinced ourselves we're the heroes of this story. But stories don't end. They just stop being told. And someday, probably sooner than we think, the Imperium will fall. Maybe to the Tyranids, maybe to chaos, maybe to its own internal contradictions. And when it does, when humanity is scattered and desperate and clinging to survival on whatever worlds we have left, maybe we'll finally understand what we did. Maybe we'll finally see ourselves the way the Ytharians saw us, the way the Onathin saw us, the way every species we've driven to extinction saw us. Not as saviors, not as defenders, but as murderers. As the galaxy's great tragedy. The species that had everything it needed to build paradise and chose to build a graveyard instead. There's a place I go sometimes, on a world that used to have a name I can't pronounce. The Imperium calls it Septima Secundus now. It's a mining colony, unremarkable, except for one thing. In a canyon far from the main settlements, there's a wall, hundreds of meters high. And on that wall, carved by hands that no longer exist, there's a mural. It shows figures dancing, celebrating, living. The species that carved it has no name in Imperial records. They were exterminated before anyone bothered to ask what they called themselves. But they left this behind. This monument to joy, to existence, to the simple fact that they were here and they mattered and they loved the universe enough to spend years carving their story into stone. I go there when the weight of what I know becomes too heavy. I sit at the base of that wall and I look up at those dancing figures and I make them a promise. I promise that I will remember, that they won't be forgotten. Not completely, not as long as I'm alive. It's a small thing, meaningless in the grand scheme. But it's all I have, all any of us have. The choice to remember, to bear witness, to refuse to let the silence be absolute. What if I told you that for every alien species you know in Warhammer 40K, there are dozens more that have been erased from history? I started with that question. And now I'll end with another. What if the greatest threat to humanity's survival isn't the Xenos at all? What if it's us? What if the real enemy is the part of ourselves that can't imagine coexistence? That sees difference as threat and diplomacy as weakness? That would rather burn the galaxy to ash than share it? We've spent 10,000 years proving we can survive anything. But we've never once asked if survival is enough. If existence without growth, without change, without the possibility of becoming something better than we are, is worth the price we've paid. I don't have an answer to that question. I'm not sure anyone does, but I think it's the only question that matters. Because someday the killing will stop. Either because there's no one left to kill, or because we finally find the courage to choose a different path. And on that day, whoever we've become will have to look back at what we did and decide if it was worth it. If the galaxy we created justifies the one we destroyed to make it. I already know my answer. I've known it for years. But you'll have to find yours. We all will. And that choice, more than any battle or crusade or doctrine, will determine what humanity really is, what we've always been. Whether we're the species that reaches for the stars or the species that poisons them. The builders or the destroyers. The hope or the horror. The answer is coming. And I think we're running out of time to decide.